Hello, everybody. Nice to have you all with us today. My name is Samantha Loy, and I'm the chair of the Young Onset Dementia Special Interest Group. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we stand on today. And for me, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I'd like to extend my welcome to their elders, past and present and emerging, and also like to welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are here with us today. Thanks everyone for joining us for our Zoom webinar today, which is called Enabling Conversations and Connections, Can a Speech Pathologist Help? The person who has really spearheaded and facilitated and organised this webinar today is Associate Professor Jade Cartwright. Jade is a speech pathologist and associate professor at the University of Tasmania with clinical and research interests in dementia and primary progressive aphasia. Jade is a member of the YOD-SIG Executive Committee and passionate about raising awareness of the role of allied health and speech pathology services as part of post-diagnostic support pathways for people with young onset dementia. Today, Jade will facilitate today's webinar with the support of a collaborative team of speakers. She will introduce them. I'll just ask you all for the audience to be on mute. And if there are any questions, please add them to the chat. But I will let Jade take it away. Thanks very much, Jade.
Thanks so much, Samantha. I'll just share my screen. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this important conversation about communication and connection in young onset dementia and the role of speech pathology. So our collaborative team of speakers has been working together behind the scenes to plan today's webinar, drawing on the research and clinical experience of 5 speech pathologists, so Kathy, Erin, Naomi, Kim, and myself, who all work in the dementia field, expertly supported by Natalie Ive and Phil Friend, who are both living with young onset dementia and primary progressive aphasia. So you will hear from all of our speakers today, either in person or through some pre-recorded videos. And we really wanted to share a range of perspectives and showcase different aspects of communication and communication supports. So we are going to begin by explaining why communication is so important, and then showcase examples of how a speech pathologist can help. We'll touch on how to find a speech pathologist and finish with a bit of a panel at the end where you'll get the chance to hear from our speakers and hopefully ask some final questions. We really encourage you to use the chat throughout the webinar today to comment or to ask questions, and our speakers are here to answer in the chat as we go. So in preparing today's presentation, I asked Natalie to describe to us what communication means to her, and this was her reply.
So what communication means to me? Communication to me is an essential life skill that we as humans must have in order to communicate verbal, non-verbal, written, or by listening, and visual communication. Without any of these life skills, life would be non-existent.
So in this short clip, Natalie beautifully captures the importance of communication, highlighting that it is an essential life skill, yet something that we do take for granted. Natalie also reminds us that communication is much more than just words. It involves verbal, non-verbal, visual, and written expression, as well as listening and understanding. This is important to note because even when communication challenges are present in young onset dementia, there will always be communication strengths that remain, that we can tap into, unlock, or strengthen to support communication, connection, and participation. So for the many Australians living with young onset dementia, communication changes of some kind will occur. This is most evident for people with primary progressive aphasia, where language changes are among the earliest and most prominent symptoms, but communication changes are experienced universally. Communication changes impact a person's independence, their participation in work, leisure, and family roles, their relationships and quality of life. Yet access to speech pathology services is still limited. This in part reflects awareness of the speech pathology role, but there is still a degree of therapeutic nihilism, where people, including some health professionals, still question the value of rehabilitation services for people with dementia, despite the growing evidence base. To advocate for better services, it's important to understand the risks of not providing services. And I'm going to hand over now to Associate Professor Erin Conway to highlight the connection between communication changes, relationships, and much needed communication supports. Thanks, Erin.
Thanks, Jade. So the presence of dementia, as you can imagine, can change a couple's relationship. And the literature tells us that there are different factors that can be linked to either sort of a positive change or a more negative change. For instance, when the couple are able to work to maintain their connection and also to maintain their sense of self, both for the carer or the spouse and the person living with dementia, they can experience higher relationship quality compared to others. Communication, so the way that we have conversations and everyday chats with our partner, could play a role in maintaining those connections, as well as contributing to the person's sense of self. Communication is the way we express who we are, give our choices and interact with our community. So in a preliminary study that I'll be talking about today, we talked to 4 spouses of people with dementia, and 2 of those people with dementia had younger onset dementia. And we asked them about how communication between them and their spouse had changed in the presence of dementia and what impact that had on their relationship. Analysis of those interviews and conversations revealed 4 different themes. 3 of them were related to the way that conversation had changed, and the 4th related to some different strategies that the couple were putting in place. So spouses described changes in the topics and the sort of types of topics that they were talking about and the quality of conversation between the pair, and they related that to the way that they continued to connect or not through conversation. So some reflected that they weren't able to use conversation as much as the connection point, with some people discussing sort of that loss of being able to come home and have the big chats about what was happening in their lives or current affairs or life planning. So the topics were more limited for them. Different couples, though, had different experiences. There was one gentleman who talked about still maintaining connection at the point of talking to each other, despite perhaps the lack of content being exchanged. The point was connection rather than what was being said, while others described more of a loss of connection. Spouses described frustration as well related to that change in conversation, both for themselves, so when conversation wasn't possible anymore or it was more one-sided, and for their partner with dementia, who would grow frustrated sometimes at how the spouse themselves was conversing with them. Spouses described then sort of an avoidance of talk following that frustration. So whether they sit in silence or work on their laptop and do other things. Changes in conversation then were also talked about in a way that they reflected the change in the roles that the spouse was seeing with themselves and the person with dementia. So they would change their conversation, try and simplify it and break down instructions, for example, to match sort of how they saw the role change for their partner with dementia. And they also felt that they were taking on more roles or responsibilities to support the conversation, and then also for conversations with other people on behalf of the person that was living with dementia. And then our spouses also describe some strategies, which is on the next slide, Jade. The joy of, thank you. So spouses talked about ways that they maintained connection. So whether it was maximising different types of connections, so physical connections, doing things together, or modifying the communication connections that they had. So this example talks about finding books that were accessible for the person with dementia and using those to interact with. They also talked about supporting communication and memory with the person with dementia through visual cues and reminders, choosing a good time of day to attempt communication if they were really wanting content sort of to be shared, or trying different ways to communicate, like using Siri to help with texting instead of using written, because the written language was difficult. And the carers also talked about, the spouses talked about support for themselves. So one man talked about incorporating care as part of his identity, but not the whole of it. But this allowed him to re-establish his priorities for his retirement. They talked about expanding social networks for themselves and for the person living with dementia as well, to try and gain some social support from others. And what this work tells us is that overall, communication changes that we see for people living with dementia have an impact on the connection and the emotions within a couple. And speech pathologists can have a role then in helping the couple to maintain communication for connection and hopefully reduce some of that frustration and avoidance that people were experiencing. And the next few sections of this talk will describe some different approaches that speech pathologists can use to do this, like communication partner training.
Great. Thanks so much, Erin. I think having that opportunity to reflect on the impact of communication changes on relationships leads us really nicely into the different ways that a speech pathologist can help. So today we will showcase 5 different types of support that speech pathologists can offer, including education and support groups, direct language interventions and compensatory strategies, training for communication partners, and the importance of participation and helping the person to find new purpose. So I am going to hand over to Dr. Kathy Taylor-Rubin, who's going to set the scene, and then with Phil Friend, talk about tailored education and support groups. And there will be some pre-recorded videos in this section.
Can I say that speech pathologists are uniquely and expertly placed to help with communication impairment. The first crucial step, and which adds value, is the speech pathologist's comprehensive assessment of the individual's speech and language. Identifying their strengths and weaknesses is the basis of moving forward with strategies, compensatory aids, programs. Speech language pathologists have access to a diverse range of evidence-based interventions, and this enables the development, in collaboration with the individual and their close others, of personalised rehabilitation-focused intervention programs. And this needs to be flexible and adapted as the individual and their families and carers' needs change across the continuum of care. We decided as a group to start with education and support, and you might wonder why you even need a speech pathologist for education and support. There certainly are a huge range of resources, groups, online advice, information, help sheets on the internet across the country, and these are great, but frequently they address primarily the burdens and challenges that are associated and arise from memory loss, associated with Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia. The speech pathologist adds value by addressing the challenges that arise specifically from communication impairment. Also, we know that it's something that speech pathologists here certainly in Australia do. Research conducted by myself and colleagues over a decade ago showed that the majority of individuals who presented to speech pathology with communication difficulties associated with dementia in general were provided with education. About a decade later, this study was replicated and expanded upon, and it was evident that speech pathologists...
Sorry, can you not hear those videos at all? Is it very soft?
It's a bit softer.
I can
Is
hear
it?
it, but it's pretty soft. It's not like the quality of your volume.
Okay, no worries. Let me just try one thing. Kathy, you are here, but I'm just worried about Phil's videos too. So I will just see. Yeah, it's already almost at maximum. I'll just try that again.
We decided as a group to start with education and support, and you might wonder why you even need a speech pathologist for education and support. There certainly are a huge range of resources, groups, online advice.
Is that still not clear enough for people? Kathy, did you want to step in and just talk to your slide?
Yes, I can. I can hear it fine here, and I apologise, everyone. I was going to be out. I was worried I wouldn't make it back. I just flew in from overseas last night, and I thought this would be a better option. But yeah, so yes. So what I've said so far is like, why do we need speech pathologists to provide education when there are a lot of resources available throughout the country, but that they often are primarily focusing on the problems that arise from the burden of memory loss. So a speech pathologist adds value because they will assist with, the burdens that arise from communication impairment and this loss of communication that has such a bad effect on relationships. And we know that speech pathologists do provide that, and that study was replicated and expanded upon in the UK just in 2019. And the same thing, that speech pathologists prefer communication partner training type interventions over impairment focused interventions. So I have here now a clip from Phil. So will we try and run that? And I ask him, is it lonely having young onset dementia, PPA? Is it lonely having PPA?
Sorry?
Is it lonely having PPA?
Well, it is, especially for the early
The early when you first find out, is that what you mean?
No, people who are in
young like yourself.
Because yes, because if I didn't have this, I'd be out in the world and stuff every day, talking to everyone, and when you, in my house, someone's going to school. Actually, two people are going to school because of my wife is a white, and another guy got, all of the four other four leave, and you're sitting going, that's why I started doing voluntary.
Yeah, so I think Phil in his answer just so beautifully summed up all the things that we know about young onset dementia and all the difficulties that arise from being in that younger cohort. Then this is talking to Phil about finally meeting peers with young onset dementia, other people with language-led dementia syndromes. What about, Phil, can I ask you, what was it like meeting other people specifically with PPA?
very slow. I mean, your Zoom was the only thing for a long time. But when Andy and is this it was when I got together some people who had it. It was just a bit of a relief, you know.
What a great comment that is as well, that relief simply because someone connects people, and that's one of the roles of the speech pathologist. So, and we know that people can connect through these specialised, specific education and support groups. Support groups are great because they're associated with improved knowledge, and this extends to sharing of coping strategies, expanding social networks, new social networks with peers, and thus reducing isolation. That's an article there about a specific evaluation of the benefits of education groups for people with PPA. So just finally, I'd just like to say too that social media is a great way for this cohort to connect and to maintain social connection and establish new social connections. But it's actually ironic that the very skills that you need to access a website and get on and post and comprehend their content is sometimes the area that the individuals finding really challenging. And so this page, for instance, facilitated by a psychologist, is a really, really nice page, really great page, but the individual might need the assistance of the speech pathologist to access that type of support and connection. And I think that's me.
That is. And thanks so much, Kathy. That's wonderful. Thank you for stepping in and doing that. So I think Kathy and Phil have provided such a strong case for support groups and education. However, for some people, direct language interventions should also be considered. So in this next clip, we asked Natalie to describe some of the communication changes she's experienced that could become targets for intervention.
Having that word on the tip of your tongue and no connection is being registered. You're just struggling and you're trying to find a way just to get it out. And it's, no matter what you try and do, it's not getting out there, and you just end up going, and then trying to hold on to your thought whilst in a conversation. At times I forget what I was wanting to say. And then if I write it down, then I've lost what's happened in that conversation. So it's requiring so much communication, so much multitasking. And I just don't have that ability. But I challenge myself to try and find ways around that. You know, I haven't given up. I'm not going to. So sometimes in a conversation, the person tries to prompt me in trying to help me to remember. And, you know, I appreciate that at times. And at other times it doesn't work because I've already forgotten and it's gone. So to me, it's sort of like, thank you so much, but it's gone and I can't reclaim it. But then sometimes if it's a good day and I'm lucky to have that, which you think about it, I go off and do my own things in the kitchen. A few hours later, it just pops into my head, the conversation. And I quickly go and get a paper or write it down on my iPad, you know, just so I have that thought down so I can give that back to that person and I have it for myself.
So in that clip, Natalie described word finding difficulties as well as her trouble in organising her thoughts in conversation, but she also really expressed the creative strategies that she uses to get around some of those communication roadblocks when they occur. And again, this is when speech pathology can help. So word finding difficulties are one of the most common and most frustrating symptoms of PPA and dementia. And we can help by working with the person and their family to identify important salient words like names of people, names of places, or words needed for favourite activities or favourite topics of conversation. And we can then systematically practice those words. The evidence does suggest that people get better at recalling the words that they do practice, helping to relearn or to retain those words for as long as possible. This treatment can also establish word finding strategies, like describing the word and providing clues for a conversation partner to use when a word finding difficulty is experienced. So this could include describing its features, like what colour it is, where you would find it, what you do with it, and a memory associated with that particular thing or item. And then with practice, people can also get better at using these sorts of strategies, helping to ease some of the frustration in conversation. There are also some great apps and computer programs out there that can help this sort of practice, and people with young onset dementia often really like these sorts of tools to assist. Natalie also noted difficulty organising her thoughts for expression, which is another really common symptom, where telling stories and contributing to conversations can become more difficult and more effortful, requiring that multitasking that Natalie described. So we have research underway trialling a storytelling intervention that's called Narnia, where stories are practiced. So this could be something like practicing telling people about their wedding day, using a really structured approach. So in this intervention, the person would start by thinking of all of the words that they need to tell that story. They would then practice putting those words into sentences and then practice putting those sentences into a beginning, a middle, and an end to tell a coherent and engaging story. These stories are then practiced, and people with young onset dementia have told us that they really like this structure. So having that structure to fall back on, which makes them feel more confident in conversation and helps them to contribute more in conversation. One of the really nice things about this particular intervention is that over the sessions, you start to get this collection of stories that you can then compile into a memory book or a chat book that can be used to support conversations and also support legacy creation as well. We can also try compensatory strategies. So these are things that can be tailored to support an individual and their specific communication challenges or participation goals. So for example, if somebody wanted to be more independent in being able to order takeaway or to order their coffee, we can create things like communication cards to help those requests. We can create things like shopping lists, which would go into a communication book or a communication wallet. And technology, again, can be really helpful here. So I've worked with a client recently who had a really great shopping app on her phone, and she'd put in all of the rare Italian meats and exotic fruits that she liked to buy. And having those in there really helped her independence in accessing the community. We can also work with the person and their family to develop communication books or things like memory wallets. So this will help somebody express their preferences as well as share facts about themselves. So for example, where they studied, where they were born, things that they've been proud of throughout their lives. We can help to create interest albums and things that become a shared focus for conversation. And again, we can customize different apps and technology to support conversation, so what we would refer to as AAC. Really importantly, the more customized and tailored these supports are to a person's communication strengths and communication support needs, the more successful they are going to be in everyday conversations. But these are all things that help to enable conversation as well as connection. Importantly, though, it's not up to the person with dementia alone to make the changes and to put all of these strategies in place. And supportive conversation partners do make all the difference. In this next clip, Natalie provides a lovely example of the difference that a supportive conversation partner can make.
Here, I was at presenting a speech at the Alzheimer's disease conference in London in June this year, and my daughter attended with me as well. And they were asking me a question, and that word, I had it at the tip of my tongue, and it just kept going and kept going. I wanted that word so much, but the lady said to me, "We get it. We understand what you're trying to say." And I think that kind of prompted me to stop, because I wasn't able to stop myself. I didn't have that self-regulation to stop. So it really came in at a great time when she did that for me. And I thought, well, that's great. If I'm understood, then I don't have to keep going searching for the word. But that's just an example. And that's PPA right there for you.
So that's a really lovely example. And I think we need more people like this who can make people with young onset dementia feel validated, valued, and understood in everyday conversations. So I'm now going to hand over to Naomi Folder to talk about our role in providing communication partner training. So thanks, Naomi.
Thank you, Jade. So far, we've talked about how communication can impact people living with young onset dementia and how it can also impact social connections and relationships. And as a person experiences these changes in their talking and their understanding, they might find it difficult to participate in conversations like they once did. But conversation is the two-way street. The person who you're talking to also has a big impact on the conversation and whether or not it's successful. Communication partners like family, friends, care staff, or health professionals can be trained to use supportive communication strategies during conversation with people living with dementia and reduce the use of strategies that might not be so helpful. For example, instead of giving multiple pieces of information at a time, we might instead try giving the person only one piece of information at once. If the person is trying to find the right word, we could give them time to think of the word first before offering a potential word, like Natalie had suggested. Or instead of testing the person on their memory, like saying, "Can't you remember what we did on the weekend?" we could instead readily give that information as part of the conversation to support their memory rather than testing it. You could think of these strategies as tools in your toolbox, where you might have a few different tools or strategies in your toolbox, but you need to know which ones will work best for the person and the environment. Next slide. So communication partner training isn't really a one-size-fits-all approach. Every person living with younger onset dementia will have a different and unique experience of these communication changes. And each of their communication partners, whether it's a family member, a friend, or a staff member, will have their own strategies in conversation that might be facilitators or barriers to participation. These strategies might also be specific to the role of the communication partner and their purpose in the conversation, where family members might have a very different and unique set of strategies compared to healthcare staff. So speech pathologists can assess conversations to see what makes them successful, what makes them difficult, and what tools will work best for the person in front of them who's living with dementia. Speech pathologists can then provide these tailored, individualized strategies to the communication partner, giving them the tools for their toolbox, and then training them to use these tools in conversation. Communication partner training has shown in the research to improve participation in conversation, strengthen social relationships, reduce frustrations and breakdowns in communication, and overall improve quality of life. For healthcare staff, communication partner training can also promote higher quality care, facilitate greater involvement in healthcare decisions, and is an effective non-pharmacological intervention for expressions of unmet needs. That is why communication partner training is something that we recommend as an essential part of dementia care across the journey for all communication partners. Next slide. And just before I finish up, I wanted to let everyone know of one self-directed, easily accessible, evidence-based program that we do have available by Erin and her team called Message. It's designed for both healthcare staff and families to support conversation and daily activities. You can find these videos freely available on the YouTube page by searching UQ Dementia Care or by following this link here. I'll hand it back over to Jade now to talk about some of the other ways that speech pathologists can help to promote purpose and community.
Thanks, Naomi. It's a great overview of communication partner training and how it can help. So we're kind of coming to the end of our kind of showcase of some of the different speech pathology treatment options available for people. And I'm going to play a final clip by Natalie to really tie everything together. So here Natalie's talking about what helps her to participate and also how she has found new purpose.
Technology, my phone and iPad in particular, my eldest daughter who lives with me, her support, as well as my family, always there on call if I need them. I'm blessed, really. And I just wanted to say, like, I'm affiliated with lots of different universities across Australia doing research projects, and like with yourself, Jade, you helped me a lot as well. Dementia Australia for advocacy and being on the Dementia Australia Advisory Committee, again, dealing with policy, making changes, you know, little changes, albeit, but still there's progress. Australia Aphasia Association, there for me as well. I've attended camps, I attend peer group sessions, and if I need anything in between. And then there's Dementia Alliance International, who themselves have peer-to-big group weekly sessions. And I've built so many solid friendships there. And they've assisted me, as in giving me advice to go to see my GP about my speech issues, because they also have speech issues with PPA diagnosis.
So here Natalie really highlights the importance of finding new purpose and staying actively involved in community. And one of the most important parts of our role is working with the person, their family, their broader support network to accommodate communication changes, to recognise and find their strengths, and to find new purpose and ways to enable participation. So for Natalie, this involves things like volunteering, advocacy work, being involved in research projects, linking in with different dementia and other organisations. So where communication changes present a barrier to participation, again, we can help to tailor the strategies and supports to facilitate that engagement. It's working at this level that makes our role so rewarding, and where opportunities for collaborative awareness raising and advocacy like today's webinar really do come about. So that brings us to the end of kind of showcasing some of the different therapeutic options. So we hope that that has opened your eyes to the role that speech pathology can play, and we hope to have put a strong case forward for the importance of communication and communication supports. We would love to see more people connected with speech pathology services, and we're certainly doing our own advocacy work from within the profession to encourage more speech pathologists to step into this really important and rewarding area of practice. So if you are looking to either refer somebody to a speech pathologist or looking for a speech pathologist for yourself, we would recommend starting with a GP or a specialist first and seeing if there are people that they recommend in your local area. It's also worth contacting your local health service to see whether any outpatient services or any groups do run within your local area. If that's not an option, then you might want to look at private speech pathology services. There is a Find a Speech Pathologist search function on the Speech Pathology Australia website that can help you find speech pathologists, again, in your local area. And we also know that the AAA, so the Australian Aphasia Association and Dementia Australia, are also very open to fielding questions and trying to help find somebody that can help. If you are lucky to have an NDIS support plan already in place, then an NDIS support coordinator or planner may also be able to help find a speech pathologist who does have experience in the dementia field. And I think, again, as a profession, we're starting to build a larger network of speech pathologists with an interest in this area, and we're certainly working collaboratively to support each other to offer more services in this space. So that brings us to the end of our sort of formal presentation today. So we are going to switch to more of a panel style setup now. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and you'll have a chance to hear from all of the speakers. So I'm going to direct my first question to Natalie. The kind of the question guiding our panel this afternoon is, how can we optimise connection and relationships for people with young onset dementia? So Natalie, can you tell us a bit more about your perspectives on the role of support groups and meeting other people who have young onset dementia and communication changes?
Yes, Jade, this is a very important question. I believe support groups play a crucial role to ensure that people living with PPA and dementia don't feel alone and, more importantly, isolated. These groups provide support and pathways into services they otherwise would not know about. That being said, PPA groups provide a safe place to express yourself and, more importantly, be yourself, free of judgments and stigma of communication and cognitive difficulties. But not only that, PPA groups provide many health benefits in terms of mental health and well-being, which is so important for people living with PPA and dementia to participate and increase their social involvement and communication participation to achieve optimal quality of life. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. You convey such important points there. And I think creating that safe space for connection is just so important. So thank you. Kim, I'm going to hand over to you next. Are you able to share your knowledge of some of the, I guess, the support groups that are currently available locally as a bit of an example or model?
Thanks, Jade. I think Natalie's expressed it so clearly in terms of the benefits of groups. I know that as a speech pathologist working in the community here in Victoria, for example, I was involved in running some group therapy programs for people with PPA out of community health. And I know that there are examples currently running here in Melbourne doing the same thing, where they will have a group session with the person who's living with dementia, which allows us to do both that education and support that Kathy spoke about. Often it also allows us with the speech pathologist's facilitation to sometimes practice some of the therapeutic strategies that we might be otherwise trying to work on within individual therapy. So as a speech pathologist in that group, I might also be aware that Mark, I want him to use his electronic communication device to initiate topics, or Jill, I might want her to be using her communication cards to support her when she's got word finding difficulty. So we're sort of able to bring all of those skills, I guess, within that group environment. But I also know groups that are running that also run specifically for the communication partners, often the family or spouses, and also services I think are now more readily thinking about. I know there was a good question in the chat about friends and how do you perhaps involve that slightly wider network. And I know of speech pathologists here also starting to ask that as a much more routine question at the outset to people in terms of when they might be ready to, if they're ready and if they're wanting to explore that. The speech pathologists also being available to provide that tailored education and support initially to friends, which can make a really big difference to keeping them connected in and not sort of fear factor of, oh, I'm not sure what to say, so I just won't go over and see them. So that's just been my experience of the different ways we might be involved in groups.
Fantastic. Yeah, really helpful examples and ideas. And I really like you kind of that point around things that are being practiced in an individual session, being able to bring that into a group setting to practice is one nice example. And great that you've touched on how to bring family and friends into some of those opportunities as well. That actually leads us nicely into the next question. So Erin, I know in your presentation you focused very much on spousal relationships. How can we support relationships more broadly?
Thanks, Jade. I think that's sort of a question that people have answered throughout the presentation. So as Kim was just talking about the idea of sort of education about what communication changes we can expect and the sorts of ways that we can support people with those communication changes for friends and for family. And I think in particular with your younger onset group that perhaps there are younger children that are at home and involved. And so as Naomi discussed, the idea of communication partner training might be able to help them to adapt and support their parent with communication difficulties, because we'll be looking at the individuals. So we can do some communication partner training that is individualised to that relationship and the two people that are part of it. And so working with the dyad together, or each of them individually as well, I think is a good place to start.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. And I think just that idea of family-centred practice where it's the whole family, it's the whole support network that we want to be supporting and enabling through our services and work together. Erin, I know you mentioned communication partner training again there, and Naomi, thank you for providing kind of that overview of what that involves. Naomi, I'd really like your perspectives on where kind of communication partner training needs to head and whether you see important gaps in the current literature or current services that we need to be addressing.
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently completing my PhD at the moment. And as part of my PhD, I'm looking at the current CPT programs that we do have, that do exist, and what the gaps are, specifically for family members of people living with dementia, given that family members are the largest portion of carers in the community and have such a significant role in social connections, like Erin has chatted about as well. So it's really interesting that a lot of the programs at the moment are more targeted to healthcare staff, or at least have in the research are more targeted to health professionals, nursing, those kind of people, rather than family members. So this means that training focuses on daily care activities rather than more social communication, which we know is so important for the day-to-day social relationships and just being connected with others as well. So there is a bit of a gap in evidence-based accessible programs for family members of people living with dementia, but there's also a bit of a gap in programs that provide targeted training of strategies with a manualized program that's guided by a speech pathologist, especially with those with active training components like practicing strategies or getting feedback. So we know that for people to change their behavior, they've got to practice these things. So if you wanted to run a marathon, you practice running every day, not just read a book about marathons the day before. There's also a little bit of a gap in the programs that are created with people living with dementia, with only a few programs that have had the people with lived experience have any input in the creation of the programs. So we know that it's so important that people living with dementia and those around them are involved in the creation of these programs. So my PhD is looking to address a few of these gaps by creating an accessible speech pathology-led program that is tailored to and created with family members and people living with dementia, with these active training components to better support families to improve their communication. So watch this space.
Thanks, Naomi. I know we're all very excited to see where your PhD ends up, and such important gaps in the literature that you're addressing, gaps in service as well, which is fantastic. Kathy, I just saw in the chat that there are a couple of general questions that we might get you to respond to, but one of the things I wanted to ask you specifically first is that I guess some of the strategies that we've talked about today perhaps are more focused at the earlier stages of young onset dementia or PPA. Would you be able to comment a little bit around how these supports can be evolved to support people in the later stages of dementia as well?
Yeah, oh, sure. Yes, I think the key is what has been mentioned numerous times in this presentation is continuing to maintain that person-centred, family-centred approach. So as the person's communication becomes more difficult, more challenging, the same strategies and resources that have been set up in earlier stages need to just be adapted, and they need to evolve. And that's why continuing ongoing connection with a speech pathologist is really important. It's not a static remediation program, rehabilitation program where problems are addressed in communication that are then solved and that the strategies applied. They'll need to be ongoing changes. For instance, communication aids might need to become less intense, so less pictures on a card, move from app-based to pencil and paper-based. It might be that further communication partner training might be needed to adapt to the new issues. I make use of a lot of what I call procedure cut maps. So I make maps, photographic maps from people's houses of how to perform a procedure still that can be supported with photos from their own home, and train the partner to be involved in that. But also groups, just because people are starting to have much more significant problems with their language doesn't necessarily always exclude them from a group. I run Montessori-based read and chat groups, and you might think, oh, reading, but you'll always find there'll be one person who has quite preserved reading and other people who have less preserved, but everyone can enjoy in warm, enjoyable conversations about loved things such as music. I often find people love to talk about music from their generation or their favourites, travel, hobbies. And with supported scaffolding, people can do really quite well in a group like that. That then becomes also another really great resource for the caregivers to meet and continue to support themselves. In fact, I followed one group through where eventually the people with dementia weren't able to attend any longer, and the caregivers continued to meet to support one another. And on that basis, I'll just quickly mention and advocate for young onset dementia day programs. Typical day programs are not culturally and socially appropriate, age appropriate for our young onset dementia cohort. We have specialised young onset dementia programs, and as a speech pathologist, our department, we liaise closely with that service as we refer our patients through to that service, and then support the staff in that service, just as we would have supported the family communication partners. So there continues to be lots to be done. And of course, finally, if there is a need for residential care, training of staff and provision of appropriate, as you mentioned, Jade, life books that help the person be identified as a unique, wonderful individual with a life history, providing that to staff and showing them how to use that is invaluable.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, again, such important points to convey. Kathy, did you want to address some of the questions in the chat as well?
Yeah, I think the one about, do people with PPA have one specific medium of communication that's that they're better at? Not as a group, and that's why individual comprehensive assessment by a speech pathologist is so important. As I was just discussing then, talking about the Montessori group, there may be some individuals who have retained literacy skills, but other individuals who don't. Some individuals have marked verbal expression problems. Everyone is different. Of course, PPA is a diverse syndrome with multiple variation in presentation. And so there's not one thing. Software in the market that assists people with word learning, I think you'll see Jade had on her slide the Tactus therapy apps, which are quite good. The only thing to remember though, when you're recommending a word finding app for individuals, word learning works on the basis of repeated practice. So it's errorless, repeated practice that leads to strengthening of links for lexical retrieval. So whilst these programs are really good, again, you need a speech pathologist to sit down and work out what's the individual's goal. Do they really want to learn 20 personally relevant items well? Then you're better to have a personalised bespoke program developed by the speech pathologist in collaboration with the individual that they repeatedly practice, rehearsal every day. And we've got lots of evidence in the literature that that can be really successful for most people. But if individuals are just wanting to continue to exercise and stimulate their word finding ability, yes, there's some good ones, and Tactus is probably a really good place to start. Yes, individuals with PPA I have seen being able to continue to work. but they do require support, and that can be really difficult. It might be, it's a fine balance. You know, you want to be able to encourage people to continue to participate in their work for as long as they can. But if then they are experiencing added anxiety, because with several of the PPA syndromes, anxiety is a huge component. There's that balancing up of the benefit and the risk. So again, it's individual. You cannot just make a blanket statement about whether that's the case or not. So go see the speech pathologist.
Mm-hmm. Kathy, there's one final question directed for you from Linda, just asking whether you can touch on supported decision making. And I know, again, that's probably something that speech pathologists can certainly support.
Yes, let me see. Linda, lovely to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for that. Thank you for your lovely feedback constantly over the years. We've been on this journey for a long time, Linda, haven't we? Supported decision making, yes. Decision making is a very complex, abstract conversation for individuals with PPA to have. And again, the speech pathologist can be very important in helping scaffold information and questions in such a way to maximize and enhance the person's ability to comprehend and then to express their true choices, their true wishes. That's probably enough said.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, and certainly a good topic to take to your speech pathologist to see what strategies they can tailor and put in place. So that does bring us to the end of our session today. Great that we got to answer some of those questions in the chat. And I am actually going to hand back over to Sam now to finish up the session.
Thanks very much, Jade and colleagues. It's been a really informative and practical presentation, and thanks everyone for attending and for your Q&As. There's been a couple of questions about the recording. So once we complete it and upload it, we'll send it to all the registrants so you can listen to it at your own leisure. And we'll also be having it on our on the AdNet website as well. I hope you've enjoyed the session today. I found it really interesting. Make a friend of your speech pathologist. I think that's really the take-home message, because speech pathology has a massive role. They can help with communication, swallowing, and a whole lot of other things for people with young onset dementia and their families. So again, thank you very much for attending our Zoom webinar today. There'll be another one in a couple of months in November about quality of life for people with young onset dementia and lived experience. So we'll send that out. And we look forward to talking to you all again soon. Thank you very much for your support.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.